morning, good whatever frickin' time zone we're in anymore, because I have no idea. Like, I know that there's been a bunch of other people that have been traveling the last 3 or 4 weeks like I have. They've probably been traveling way more than I have, but I'm getting too old for this. Like one time zone, back to the other time zone, back to the middle time zone, and I'm like, I don't even know what day it is. I was chatting with one of our customers yesterday, chit chatting, and I was like, "Yeah, we can do that on Monday, tomorrow." And he's like, "Today's Thursday," and I was like, "Oh, yeah." So, hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Team Tim. We have all of us here. Some of us were at conferences. Some of us were at really fun places, Mr. Schnurr. I'm Tim Golden, founder of Compliance Scorecard, with our great guest here, Eric. Eric, why don't you take a second, say hello, and then we'll go back around the room to everybody else. Tell us a little bit about yourself, who, what, where, how, and why.
The why is sort of tough. My name's Eric Stover. I'm a long-time, they call it seasoned technologist who's been working in IT and in cybersecurity. I took some time to do the math, and it's about 40 years.
Wow.
So I've run the route all the way up from the provider side through EDS and then through Accenture. Then I went native and I worked as a CISO at a regional bank. And I'm now shifting into what I'll call a third phase of career, where I've decided to join the ranks of many and say, hey, how can I help a small business again? The way I did when I started my career.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that. Mr. Jesse, thanks for holding down the fort last week. How are you? You got some new things going on. You probably need to tell us about these new things that just came out.
Okay, yeah, we can talk about that. So, Jesse Miller, founder of Power PSA Consulting. We help MSPs build security programs for scale and do it profitably. And that leads right into the new thing that we have going on. It's the Power Grid. And see what I did there? The Power Grid community. We've started a community that will be launching in April in cooperation with a couple of different vendor sponsors to empower MSPs to build VCISO programs for themselves and their clients. And so I'm super excited about this. You can go check it out. It's powerpsa.com/powergrid. That's POWERGRYD. And so that's what's going on, Tim.
Awesome, and thank you so much for that. And of course, Mr. Schnurr, back from where the hell you were? You want to share about that?
What's going on? Yeah, so back from kids' spring break last week. It was a nice week off, and then got a little time locally in the mountains. So a little bit of hot, a little bit of cold, and welcome back, Tim. Glad you're back in the host chair here. But I'm Tim Schnurr. I am a part-time VCISO. That's what the VCISO thing means. We'll start with that. But I also help small businesses with IT and security, privacy, and intellectual property. Malicious insider threat is a favorite topic of mine. So, Tim, welcome back.
Yeah, it's been a fun week. Hold on, let me do this over here because I forgot to have this queued up. But let's do this right here real quick and push that there.
What do you got for us?
And then I just wanted to make sure we got Jesse's URL up there. I was trying to rapidly grab it over here while you were talking. So for those of you in our audience that are listening, go check out what Jesse's doing over there in Power PSA with his Power Grid, not to be confused with the Power Grids, right? But go check it out. Anyways, we're talking one of Jesse's favorite words. And y'all that know me, can we just stop and call it fractional instead of virtual? And we've had this debate back and forth on what word and so on and so forth. But today, I've come to the dark side. And I'm now starting to use the word VCISO. So, Jesse, do you want to give us a little introduction about kind of VCISO services, overall generalized stuff, so we can kind of form today's conversation around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting when we talk about VCISO, and that term is interpreted very differently by many. And so maybe we should just start with talking about what does the word VCISO mean and what does it encompass. And I will give you the prototypical consultant answer and say that depends. But really, VCISO is kind of a term that the industry has coalesced around and has used to talk about security advisory and risk strategic type services for clients. Okay, so I like to break that into three different categories. The first one being SMB, and I mark that as 0 to 150 users in the MSP space. And then the second is mid-market, and I call that 150 to 1,000. And then SME, small to medium enterprise, or and above 1,000 plus. And so those different categories are going to have different levels of services that I think a VCISO is going to provide to them. For the small business, SMB, which we're probably most familiar with, that's going to be a lot of project management, prescriptive CIS control, gap analysis, and then giving some impact analysis to that to create a risk score, and then creating a prescriptive roadmap and managing against that roadmap, having the customer personnel do the things they're supposed to, have our internal personnel do what they're supposed to, and then help the client increase their security posture that way. It's a more tactical role, right? When you get to the mid-market, it becomes more of what a true CISO you'd think what they do. It's a strategic role where you're guiding IT, IS teams, helping them understand security, helping them build security and shift left in their security processes. Working with executive management, even presenting to the board, or at least enabling executive management to present to the board. And it's still about 80-20. You still do have to have that security acumen because you're going to get, it's still a smaller environment, and you're going to get enmeshed into those technical discussions. So you need to have some technical chops there. Then we move into the SME or the enterprise. And I think the role really shifts there to more what Tim would probably call like a big four, or Eric would call as well, a big four consultant type role, where you're taking chunks of residual risk and offloading those for the organization and executing on those. Things like running a TPRM program or focusing on an OT initiative for a manufacturing company to segment their manufacturing systems off into a secure moat behind a zero trust network access or something like that. Scoping down for CMMC. So that's how you see it from an enterprise perspective. So that's kind of a long-winded explanation, but I wanted to set the stage here as we begin this discussion.
Awesome, and thank you so much for that. And yes, I always like to define acronyms.
Yeah, and Tim, I have no idea why it's not called fractional.
I was throwing them back and forth there.
Yeah. I have no idea why they don't call it fractional, because think about it, like it's basically you're working with multiple companies. You're typically, I don't know where the V came from 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I don't know when we started hearing this term. Eric probably has a better idea. But I agree. Like those classes are perfect on, what you're doing for an SMB, what you're doing at the mid-size level. I don't think we usually hear the term that often for some, as you said, like an OT project or a one-off project for 1,000, a bigger company, right? You're basically coming in as a consultant contractor or whatever it is. Right. But the VCISO term is alive and well and strong for SMBs, and certainly at the mid-sized companies where they have a sysadmin, they've got a tech team, but they don't have like a true security leader. Everyone should check out Jesse's post. He does a good job talking about like, you start dealing with the politics and executive management and the board at really at the mid-size level. So
yeah.
And so, Eric, coming from the banking background, and now you talked a little bit about working for a big firm and whatnot in there, right? Now, I'm correct me if I'm wrong. You're making sort of that segue into like the smaller business, right? And so, as you think about that, and you think about security offerings and in consulting, talk a little bit about like your experience, like going from the big one now down into smaller SMB markets.
Well, I'll take it a step even further back. I don't know whether any of you more mature people remember a company called EDS. Mm-hmm. And EDS actually sort of jump-started the MSP game by trying to move from a normal outsource to developing an MSP type practice. Mm-hmm. And that was in the 90s. I had the opportunity to help lead and architect that, and left it when the .com boom came along because, well, of course, y'all got to jump on the .com boom bandwagon.
Yeah.
And then I went to the dark side and I went to a bank. So I left what was a nascent MSP type operation. I architected systems that had 1.5 million endpoints. I left to join a bank. Wow, that's just completely off the rails.
Right.
And I turned into a customer of potential MSPs.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of tough when you go from one side of the coin to the other because you start questioning the MSPs about how they're doing, why they're doing. How do I know that I'm not the one-off that they really are trying to just lure as a customer? And so when I went then to a much smaller bank, I needed MSPs to help deliver what I needed to do in a secure fashion. Jesse identified sort of the tiering based on size, but there's also tiering based on specialty and special needs. You can't be a very small bank and just say, okay, I'll take the same kind of services that we're going to give to the mom and pop pizza chain.
Yeah.
So for me, the difference there and the learning there is that, in the last 3 decades, a lot hasn't changed in terms of saying, do you know who your customer is? Do you know where your dog is?
You just pulled the Tim.
There you go. Do you know who your customer is? Do you know what they need? Are you assessing what is critical to them in terms of security and the risks that are going to keep them, that you want to avert to keep them safe? That really hasn't changed. And as I sort of dive back into this, I'm discovering that a lot of the basics are still there.
Yeah.
Some of the things you need to focus on. Do you know your customer? Do you know what your edges are in terms of what that ideal customer profile looks like? And what happens when you stretch beyond it? What do you break?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Jesse does talk a lot about ICP, Jesse.
Yeah, I mean, and Eric and I really see eye to eye on this. I think that might have been what spawned getting you on the show way back when, is when we started talking about, I think, you have some really deep background in building and scaling large organizations and teams. And so, yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. What does break once you start going out your ICP from your experience?
Pretty much everything from top to bottom. You break your marketing in terms of, and sales in terms of a salesperson saying, gee, I did it for this one-off customer. Maybe I can stretch it a little further. And all of a sudden the one-off got a little bit better, bigger. It stretches in terms of delivery. When you say, okay, this is the standard profile and the standard way we approach our ideal customers. And now you have another customer that comes along that says, gee, I want you to improve your response time by 50%. Well, are you staffed for that? Are you staffed to work the same that you need to on a Sunday on Christmas Eve? You stretch it in terms of your understanding of costs. Gee, now I have to staff for that additional time when I didn't build the service and I didn't price it for that. You stretch it from the top to the bottom when you stray from that ICP. That said, if you design your services well, you know what that widest edge could be. You know how far you can stretch. And for those that haven't listened or haven't heard Jesse use the phrase connective tissue before on his posts, that's exactly what he's talking about. It's the ability to say all of those things threaded together, how far can you elastically move them before you break?
Right.
And so the best thing there is to say, well, maybe it's a new service. And you design it from the ground up to say, hey, here's something new that we can do. Or you're redesigning the service set you have from the ground up, saying, here's what it's going to cost me. Here's what I need to do in terms of skills. Here's what I need to do in terms of people. Here's what I may have to do in terms of the technology that I use to interact with my customers. And then at the end of it, you say, okay, Now I'll tell the salesperson what he can do and hope that they listen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from the audience as well. Like, I think Tim just asked that question he popped it up a little bit, but what is your, even if you're an MSP, an MSSP, even if you're a cyber security consultant, a VCISO, do you define your ICP? And like, does your webpage specifically target somebody? Is that like really, is that the main aspect of it, Jesse? Like the targeting? And Eric, you can answer this as well. Like, is it more kind of like you kind of just have to churn through inquiries as they come in,
Right?
like in terms of
Well,
ICP? Yeah.
I mean, it's not less than targeting, but it's definitely more than that, right? And that's what, when I say connective tissue, that's what I mean. Typically we see marketing. We typically see the first link in that chain broken. Is marketing is disconnected from sales, right?
Yeah.
And then even sales is disconnected from solution engineering, even though they're working literally with each other every week. So just let's take the front of that, before we even get to service, and say, do we have a type of customer we're going after in a vertical, in a size, and does our messaging say that? That's great. We get an MQL in, marketing qualified lead. Does then when it goes to sales, are they targeting and qualifying the same way? Is solution engineering writing scopes, and do we have scope templates that actually have targeting language and marketing language that speaks to the pain points of that client, so they don't get through the marketing, get through that honeymoon phase, and then say, oh, you know what, actually these guys just look the same as everybody else, I'm going to go get quotes? Or does our quote actually talk to their specific pain points and our outcomes speak to their exact needs? Because then we're really in a good spot. From there, then we hand it off to onboarding. Onboarding should have the same, bespoke type of care for the client, and then service delivery onto account management, and the cycle continues. So when we talk connective tissue, that's what we mean, and that's what Eric was referring to.
Yeah, and so going back to that, just to back up a little bit. So I mean, a lot of MSPs just have a fixed SKUs, right? Like very rigid SKUs, I'll call it. Mm-hmm. They have certain tools they use. They may have services, but usually it's a lot of tools. So how, the system kind of almost gets broken from the beginning, as you said, because if you're only marketing those tools and if you think about a typical MSP that's trying to scale or get efficient, right? I mean, I know there's a balance, right? You have to have some efficiency and scale and automation, some uniformity in like the things you deal with, but how do you toe that line? And what I'm really trying to get to is like, I'm an MSP, I want to start a VCISO program, and I want to really tailor to that ICP, as you guys are saying. So how do you get, how do you allow that kind of, as you said, connective tissue or flexibility, or the ability to kind of like tailor the actual, not just the messaging, the marketing. I think it's almost impossible. I mean, you're talking about like industries, and so that's the easy part. But when you actually talk to the specific customer, how does your systems, right? Like your SKUs and your marketing and your salespeople, like how do you get them all on board with, going out and offering this like very at the end of the day, it's going to be customized and they're going to love it. But like, how do you get there? So,
well, I'll let Eric dig into this, but I will say a couple quick ideas. First is probably if you're building net new, you're in a better position because you don't have to turn an aircraft carrier that's already in motion, right? So that's one.
Right.
Second is, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? You got to start somewhere, Tim. And you have to start making changes, right? And so incrementally do changes. Things like, what's the one thing we can fix that's the lowest hanging fruit to get it better and get quick? It's the same thing as when you go into a security program for a client. If we can get quick wins and get people excited and get people buying into the idea, we'll do better. So, that's going to look different for each MSP. So I'm not going to be able to give you some, panacea that's going to solve your problems, but really, you have to start small and begin with modular pieces and start block and tackling. And I think, and I will say, I think it starts with your targeting from a marketing perspective and getting marketing and sales aligned. If you can get those two teams working together, you're going to actually solve a lot of the scope creep that support complains about, because it's much less it's frictionless bringing clients in, and you're not having to make all these special acquisition, or you're not having to acquiesce or making special concessions to clients to get them to sign, right? Because they're already in that mode and they fall right into your standard templates, right? So Eric, I'll let you comment there, but that's kind of how I see it.
The other side of that coin is if you've developed a rigid set of services, then you probably by definition should have thought about the rigid way that you're selling it and the rigid set of customers that you're willing to live within that edge, within those edges. So it's just as fair to say, don't go after those customers, or say, here's someone else that can serve your needs better. No one likes turning away business, especially if you're a small business. But if you're just starting off, that small and modular approach basically means that you have a better chance of successfully bringing in a broader set of customers. And then you may focus as you go forward. You may find out that, gee, my best customers are going to be mom and pop pizza shops.
Yeah.
And you become the MSP for mom and pop pizza shops for the East Coast.
Yeah. I like what you're saying there, and that's kind of what I was going to say too, is like, Tim, to your point, right, let's get down to brass tacks here and say I'm an MSP who wants to start a VCISO practice. What do I actually do to get started? Right. Well, I think what's that? You buy compliance scorecard and you're good to go.
You buy Power Grid, right?
You buy both.
Exactly.
Look at you guys.
500 tools. That's how many I have in my staff.
Cheating the rules.
There we go. Honestly, look inward. We had Tim Fitzpatrick on the show a while back, and I just saw a video with him where he's talking about his 3 power questions, which I just love. That is, who are the clients we make the most, and I'm going to butcher it, but go follow Tim Fitzpatrick and find that video. Who are the clients we make the most difference for? Who are the clients we love working with, and why, right? And I think that's it. Yeah. And so, but then add to that, if you're looking to start risk services or VCISO services, what about these clients do they need for security? Or can we identify a common thread where they're deficient in certain things and start thinking about it that way? And if you don't have that, at least start building that out for a specific type. I wanted to make a point, as everyone says, well, okay, Amazon, they're pretty successful. They scaled pretty well and they don't focus on a specific type. However, they have different campaigns and different targeted groups for each client type that they go after. So that's to say, once you've focused and you've built this out, let's say for the pizza shops, Eric, right? Then you can take that model and lift and shift it onto a different industry. And so you can branch outward from there, but only until you have that model in place and you can rinse and repeat it.
I got a really good example. Not Amazon, but Wayfair. Have you ever heard this story on how they started? They bought the domains on everything, like birdhouse.com, like dogtoy.com, like whatever, right? It's like, as you said, like specifically ICP of the domains, and then they just rolled them all up, and now it's Wayfair. Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome.
Exactly.
I'd like to hear from
side of that coin, sort of riffing off of what Jesse just said, is that if you want to start the VCISO services, one of the best things that you can do, not only looking inward, but have the VCISOs help look inward as you're building out that practice, because you're going to have a standard set of tools. You may use Power Grid, you may use something else. But you're going to want to have a standard set of tools that VCISO is going to use that at least helps them align with the balance of the tools that the MSP is using. And this is one of those challenging things that ends up being a real topic of discussion, which is the VCISO merely a salesperson for the MSP services? And the answer should always be no, because the VCISO is going to know what those services are and is going to know whether they align right up front. If you don't have that alignment up front, then you're setting up the VCISO for less than success and yourselves for less than success.
There's the hand grenade into the room right there.
Someone's going to throw it.
Exactly.
Good
stuff.
So last piece on that is you got to make somebody accountable for the program, right? So this is not a like, hey, we'll just kind of all pitch in and do it. Like you need to have somebody who's going to be, you're going to build our VCISO practice, and whether it's somebody splitting time initially, which it will be as you get started, right? You have to have that person that's accountable, because that's the way you're going to get results, because they're going to own it then, right? So, I want to get back to this.
Probably,
I want to get back to this,
Jesse, on that as well. Like that leadership has to empower as well that person, right? You said accountability, but empowerment as well, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
They're like, oh, go fix that regulatory thing. Good luck with that. Yeah.
Well, I want to get back to this, but before we do, Tim, can you talk about Right of Boom a little bit and just what you were hearing on the ground at the booth when you were talking MSPs and stuff, and any context around some of this? Are MSPs struggling, or they feel confident about this? What are we hearing?
Yeah, so there was a lot of discussion at Right of Boom this past week, or actually 2 weeks ago, about VCISO services, right? And there's kind of a couple of different camps in the MSP space. I'm going to make some generalizations, and so don't think that I'm targeting you specifically or a specific type of MSP, but there are kind of a couple of different types. There's the MSP that really struggles to do the basics. Backup, 2FA, security awareness training, like the 5 or 6 basic things, those that really struggle with getting those rolled out, having those things in place, and operationalizing that at scale for their customers. And then there's others that really have those pieces together and kind of honed that, that SKU, as Tim Schnur mentioned earlier. We do the managed part really well. We handle tickets well, we're ensuring 2FA well, we're ensuring these things well, and now we're recognizing that we need to move into this consultative role as an MSP, to have that risk conversation as an MSP, right? To go from Johnny Plumber fixing the pipes to actually architecting how the plumbing should be within the home. And so there were a lot of really great conversations and a really lot of MSPs wanting to understand, how do we do this? Yes, we have endpoint. Yes, we have this. Yes, you have the basics covered. Mm-hmm. Now recognizing that shift to a more consultative role, to being that expert, like that was some of the things that I noticed in conversations and in hallway conversations at Right of Boom this past 2 weeks ago, was really just taking that in and wanting to have some kind of consultative role, and virtual fractional CIO security services is the next entryway into those MSPs. Boiling it all the way down to actually helping the SMB understand the risk conversation.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'm seeing too from a lot of the MSPs I talk to, and that's the idea for Power Grid, right? Is to get a community where they can come ask questions and learn how to offer those VCISO services and get more educated, right? We're obviously partnering with Empath and Synomi on that, and don't mean to plug vendors, but I'm excited about what Empath is doing, and I think it's a great place to start for these MSPs, right? So let's go back, because I really want to address this, and I want to talk through this and equip MSPs to answer this question, because they're inevitably going to run into it, and that's an MSP can't ethically deliver VCISO services. I hear this a lot.
Great question. Great question. Hold on. Let's do this and start over. Like, what was the question again, Jesse?
And Jesse, is this independence related, or go ahead? Yeah.
So the question or the comment that I've heard, and I think that is prevalent in some circles, is that MSPs can't ethically deliver VCISO services. And, I think that's just dead wrong. I think the word we're talking about here is ethics, and an internal IT person or a CISO is going to have just as much ethical dilemma to sweep things under the rug or make themselves look good or preserve their job if the opportunity presents itself. So let's put that to the side. And I want to say another piece is, I think actually MSPs are positioned better to provide VCISO services over other providers, because it's a saying that I've coined about similar to this, talking about operations, is that the sum of the whole is better than the peak of the parts, right? And so what an MSP has at their disposal is a stack. Tim, you talked about that. Like, what do they do with their stack? Well, okay, they might they might have an AV that detected 98% and the best in class detects 99%, right? But that is an exercise in futility when you consider that they have a whole range of detection, backup, a stack that works together that can provide better security for their customers. And so when you bring a VCISO into the mix and they can actively identify risk and help the client make the right decisions in what I call, or what I call good enough security, right? That's really powerful for a client. And I just want to address one more thing is let me tell you, after working with MSPs and MSPs security programs for the last 10 years, there is no issue with conflict of interest in an MSP because the VCISOs will hold the IT team accountable. And there's been knockdown, drag out fights that I've been in meetings about people not doing their job and people holding each other accountable. And so let's get that out of the way right away, is that there is not an issue with conflict of interest when it comes to delivering security services as an MSP. And I feel pretty passionate about that, as you can tell.
I'm with Jesse on that. Put another way, other than true knockdown, drag out fights, the VCISO can be the best entry point for improving the MSP's services because they're there more often listening to the higher order problems, not just, hey, here's a ticket, but here's the why of the ticket. They have an opportunity to be better feet on the ground. And if they're doing the job right, they're going to actually make the MSP better as a result.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, having been in a similar situation and, worked in a co-managed environment with internal IT, the ethics part, I kind of agree with you, Jesse, because ethics, period, whether you are doing this work as an MSP or a VCISO, or you're doing this work internally, ethics is just always there, right? So if you're not ethically working, period,
right,
whether you're offering those services or not, yeah, there will be a problem. Conflict of interest, well, the struggle between selling more services, making more MRR, doing more things, right? This kind of, when I was doing fractional work or VCISO type work, we based it on FTE. We said, 20% FTE over the course of X number of months. You do the math, you get me 2 or 3 hours a week or whatever that pans out to be, right? And it's set, right? All the way back to the very beginning of our conversation on what is the expectations, is it the right customer fit, and this is what we are, and more importantly, are not going to do, right? And so the ethics conversation and the conflict of interest conversation, like, it is their business decision whether they choose to buy the widget or not buy the widget. My job as the fractional or the virtual CISO is to present them the options and let them make the decision.
Yeah, the outside, as an outsider, like virtual CISO, everything's delineated in a contract. It's crystal clear what's in scope, what's not in scope, what you're doing, what you're not doing.
Should be.
I find that really hard to believe. And you were talking about like selling other services, right? Like, it's no different than internal IT trying to sell budget for the next year. So
right.
I don't really see much of a difference.
Budget. That's a sort of a perfect point as well. In that the VCISO is going to have a better idea of how better to help the organization protect itself going forward.
Yeah.
And it may be investments, it may be activity that is outside the scope of what the MSP is doing.
Yeah.
And sort of on the sidebar, one of the things that sort of is mentioned is the notion is, does that mean that in some cases the VCISO is in essence sort of stepping into a VCIO kind of role? And the answer is, yeah, there very well could be.
Yeah.
And at that point, then it's a matter of saying, once again, how well are you stretching the VCISO services? The big thing about VCISO services is they are going to be by nature more broad. They do have the ability to flex more. So they have a greater ability that the SKU is bigger. I guess you could put it that way in terms of saying, what are you doing to meet a customer's needs? And it's closer to risk and it's closer to the business needs of the customer than just saying, okay, AV is running well today.
Yeah. I might have a little bit of a different take on that because, and here's why I say that. You know, Eric, you've held both the VCIO and the CIO role and the CISO role, right? So you're kind of a 5-tool player, okay? And that's not typical.
Okay.
And I may have had the wrong tools out at the same time. It's
But-
very fair to ask the question about conflict of interest if you're both a CISO and a CTO.
Yeah.
So,
Well, my only point is that, you know, just having worked with the two groups for, you know, I mean, it's, you know, many years now, there's just still a really large knowledge gap on the VCIO, and it's a whole other discipline, security risk, right? That's security is such a broad career path in of itself, and then to say, okay, now we need to take everything IT and stack it on top of that. I think it's a recipe for, you know, it's a recipe for not a great outcome. However, I think that we should be intentional in training our CIOs to have a top level knowledge of security to work better with the security team, security advisor, or VCISO, however you're structuring that service.
And let's face it. One of the stats that was shared at Right of Boom was 90% of small businesses in the United States is less than 10 people. It's actually less than 3 people. So they're not even going to have any of these roles or any of these conversations.
Right.
They don't know the difference between a CISO or a CSO or an FF, whatever acronym you might include there, right? So us as MSPs coming into that role, however we choose to label ourselves and market ourselves, the reality is we're the technical experts that you need that you don't have, right?
Yeah.
You know, the enterprise completely different.
Yeah.
So I think VCIO really is like creating dollars or like how are you using digital technology to like augment the business? And the CISO obviously is like on the risk side, and it's not just technology risk. They're playing risk manager, like the risk department, the whole thing.
Right.
So but both of those roles, I think in the MSPs, like a lot of the concepts and conversations we've had on the show really talk about like knowing the customer, understanding the why, tying it to business problems. They're both failing in that traditional kind of like what we think a VCISO and a VCIO is doing for outsourced IT, right? And so either one, if they can go out and know that customer and know the business, know the problems, know what keeps them up at night, you know, they can better provide solutions. So I think ideally you have both, and if it's a big enough client, great, and they should work together. So
I agree with that. Yeah, you're not going to sell VCIO and VCISO to a 5-person company unless they're a boutique investment firm with like $1 billion of assets. You probably sell it then, but typically that's not the case, right? So
you're the technology guy. What it boils down to is that client doesn't care about the distinction. They care about knowing that stuff's going to run, that it's going to be safe, that I'm going to be able to make payroll next week because the systems didn't go down. And that really is what it boils down to. If you slice it too fine, then what ends up happening is you sort of disenchant the customer. Oh, you really don't want to solve my problems. You want to sell me something.
Exactly.
It's over.
full screen on my black eye. Yeah.
Oh, what happened there?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's actually like swim goggles, like you're just wearing them too tight. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Oh wait, let's play back up full screen.
Can't keep the water out.
So you went from the mountain to the water, and the mountain didn't get you hurt, but the swim goggles did.
That's right. That's right.
So let's just pause for a moment. We've got a bunch of people in the audience listening. Thanks everybody for listening. What are your questions for us as a group here? Like, how is it that we can help you building out your VCISO practices? Take a minute, drop a couple of comments in there. We can kind of work through them. Michael, thanks so much. Here, let's pull up Michael's real quick. They just don't know what they don't know, right? It's our job to help them learn. Yeah, great comment, Michael. Thank you so much. Jesse, you want to tackle that one?
Well, yeah, exactly. It is our job to help them learn, and I think that starts with small pieces of education. I mean, it's interesting. Even in 100+ companies, you'll see they don't have a true risk program in their business. So you can start with a very benign, hey, let's get you a business risk plan. And from a VCIO perspective, how are we managing our risk? What do you guys see on the future for the next year? What are your major risks as a business? Technology aside, we do risk as an MSP. We have a full cybersecurity risk program, but we can also just help you with your business risks. And that's just an easy discussion to have and help people start planning, right? No charge. I'm going to sit down with you, take your SBR and go over that, right? And then you have those conversations, and that will that education, that long-term education, will build over time. So I think that's something you do with a legacy customer that's small and just hasn't been thinking that way. And it's easier when you target and you bring in net new clients that are past the I don't know I have a problem stage, right? So that's how I would approach that one particularly. I like Paul's comment too about a company that's got HIPAA regulations that are small. I hear so many horror stories, Paul, about this exact instance, right? And oh no, our MSP handles that. Like, no, we don't.
Well, and here, and I'll let Tim Schnurr chime in on this a little bit too. But there are, you know what? I'm going to let you take it, Tim, because I could probably rant on this for an hour. So go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, rant a little bit. I think. Yeah. I mean,
so first and foremost, we all know that HIPAA is a challenge, right? They just came out with the new ruling, 2 weeks ago now, if my math is correct, maybe 3 weeks ago. And as I was starting to dig through it, I was sadly disappointed in the changes that were made because it doesn't have a lot of teeth, right? And so we're kind of right back in the same boat we've always been when it comes to HIPAA privacy and HIPAA security. Now, they have introduced a couple of good things, but I think to Paul's comment here, right? Having that compliance officer, and this is the conversation and the contradiction that we see a lot. Like, as the MSP, can I be the compliance officer? Or does it have to be the individual at the customer? Like, are they the compliance officer? And I see this a lot, right? One of the requirements, have somebody accountable, right?
Yeah.
Have somebody in the organization where the buck stops here.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the CEO, right?
Yeah.
But the CEO, like in our previous conversation, doesn't know what they don't know. That's where we can really come in and provide that added value as a managed service provider to fill them in on what the risks are,
right,
and allow them to make the business decisions, allow them to be the accountable person, and you as the trusted advisor.
Yeah. And I'll add to that, Tim, like, same thing with FTC, right? I don't hear about them hiring enforcement agents, and HIPAA doesn't have like tax examiners like the IRS running around the country being like, your HIPAA is not in order. And I think it's a little bit of a travesty, but so playing that risk role. Last week we had Roddy Berger on last week's show, and I don't know if you caught that, Tim, but he talks about, instead of QRRs, right? Like quarterly risk reviews, which I love this term, really. And that's that connective tissue that Jesse's talking about, like knowing the business, and even providing a VCISO function for like a dentist office. Like, you're going to be able to get their house in order and really talk to the why, and they'll understand it. They'll be excited. Not excited, but they'll be they'll empower you to put those security controls in place.
Yeah, good stuff. Just, do you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I think for the piece of the HIPAA thing, this speaks to what we were talking about knowing your client base and building a right fit solution for them. So I think that there is a lot of good money to be made in those small mom and pop practices because you can be very prescriptive, right? So you come in and you say, we have this stack and we have this procedure to give you your HIPAA compliance. We're going to give you security advisory from a VCISO on a quarterly basis, maybe a couple hours a quarter to just meet with you, talk through your risks, make some adjustments, change the prescription, and execute over the next quarter. And you're going to be responsible, but we're going to give you that little push, that little adjustment to make sure you're managing your risk properly. You do that at scale through economies of scale, and the VCISO actually does become profitable for really small organizations because they have a driver and you give them good enough security, just enough to stay compliant, but also enough risk to make sure they're doing the right things. You know, basic data protection, endpoint protection, and cloud security. And, you know, for those businesses, that's going to be good enough. And you design that modularly and you deploy it in a prescriptive manner, I think you're going to be well ahead of the game. And then you've used vCISO effectively for your particular client base and the size and the industry that you're in.
All right, I'm going to toss a grenade.
Oh, man.
Now that the new HIPAA regulations are out, can we just stop calling it HIPAA compliance? Because there isn't a thing. Right?
Yeah.
Thing, right? So,
that's true.
We follow and this drives me crazy because if you think about it, right? When I think of compliance, I think there's some kind of third-party objective attestation that's kind of brought and tied into it, right?
Yeah.
That don't happen with HIPAA. That don't happen with FTC. Like even when we were doing FedRAMP moderate stuff, I would never use the phrase, we're FedRAMP moderate compliant. No, we have an ATO, we have an authorization to operate under the FedRAMP moderate umbrella, right? So I'm like, can we just stop using these words? And there's a reason why I'm saying this. Because when MSPs and their customers think about the word compliance, it's scary, right? And they get freaked out. Right? Oh my God, I'm not compliant. Like, make me HIPAA compliant. Well, that's not a thing. How about align my business to the best practices of HIPAA privacy and HIPAA security? Right? Words matter, at least to me, anyways.
Yeah,
so
Tim, just do it. It's like the Nike thing. Like, right? It's like identify, protect, detect, respond. I'm like, oh, that really helps somebody out. Like, Wes had a comment about NIST 2.0 and someone came back and was like, CIS is just better.
But I've never heard anyone say that they were compliant with the speed limit sign.
Yeah. There we go.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So Paul brings up another great question about WISP. If only there was a platform that automated WISP being rolled out literally on Monday. I'm sorry. Makes a great comment about WISP, right? So written information security plans, written information security policy, tax preparers, maybe Eric, do you have a little bit around this? Like, tell me about that.
A WISP is really it's just your set of rules of the road that you're going to follow internally. It's an expectation of most financial services organizations. Well, actually, pretty much all of them. And it's just basically saying, here's the rules of the road that I'm going to follow, and here's how I do it. It doesn't need to be complex. It just needs to say, here's what I'm doing. Here's how you can measure what I'm doing. And in the end, when you've got an auditor coming in, the first thing they're going to look at is that program to say, are you doing what you say you're doing? It doesn't have to be rocket science. It doesn't need to be a tome that you put on the shelf once a year before the auditor gets there. Just once again, back to Tim, just do it. It's what you do.
I should have worn my other shirt. On the back it says just document.
Turn around and there it is. But it does not need to be anything more complex than that. It's just documenting what you do or what you say you're going to do. And what ends up happening then is if you're not doing it, that's entirely on you. And it's not something that can't be. Also, back to Jesse's point, it's not something that you don't have. you have to create from whole cloth every time. You can develop the skeleton of a WISP that works well, and there are a lot of framework practices for building them. There's nothing wrong cycling back to a conversation if you know what your customer profile is and you're going to focus on insurance agencies. There's nothing wrong with understanding what a WISP would look like appropriately for insurance brokerages,
Right.
and saying, okay, I have the template for one, and using that as a basis for saying, okay, let's have that broader conversation. Here's our starting point.
Yeah. 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 And that goes back to Paul's comment about, our MSP does this. This is why I believe VCISO services in some form or other need to be applied to all MSP's customers, just from a risk protection and a level setting perspective. So if you have small clients, let's say our MSP does this, if you've gone through and given risk assessments during onboarding and you've done risk assessments retroactively for your client base and gap assessments, even something easy to say, do you have a written information security plan? No, you don't. This is a gap. We can solve this for you. And you've level set with the client. Now it becomes a question of not my MSP does this for me, but my MSP can do this for me, and I'm choosing not to do it at this point, right? So that is a much different conversation, and you're gonna have some friction when you go to do this and change the change course on that, right? But I think it's something that's really necessary and needs to be a part of your onboarding going forward, and I think it needs to be done retroactively for the client base.
So as we're coming down to the top of the hour, we always try to leave with one key takeaway. Mr. Schnurr, I'll make you go first since you brought it up and reminded all of us. What is the one key takeaway?
Yeah, so I wanted to get the wheels back on the track a little. We're talking about MSPs providing VCISO services, how to start a VCISO program, and Jesse probably has a better idea. I've only stepped in as a VCISO just recently in my career, and I think the biggest things I've learned on these engagements are the risk assessments, understanding the business, understanding the why is step one, right? Like, even if you don't have a clearly defined ICP to start with, I think the first step in MSP or an IT provider, even an MSSP, could go deeper into understanding the why and how the business works and how it operates, and you'll clearly jumpstart a VCISO program. So,
yeah,
awesome. Thank you for that. And Eric, what is your one key takeaway from today?
Key takeaway is, well, 1.5 key takeaways. Call it virtual, call it fractional, call it executive consulting. It's how you get closer to your customer.
Awesome.
And
awesome.
The value of getting closer is both the ability to develop a trusted advisor relationship that's deeper and more profitable, but it adds value on both sides of the equation for the customer and for the MSP.
Awesome. Great stuff. Since I'm right here, I'll go next. So my key takeaway, if you're looking to roll out some kind of CISO, information officer, information security officer in your MSP practice, I'm probably going to steal Jesse's, but the first is define what that customer profile looks like. Define what goes in that service offering, and make sure you bring your whole team in on the conversation from the very beginning, so that you're not disjointed along the way, so that your salesperson isn't selling something that your technical implementer doesn't exist, and that your marketing team isn't putting out baloney that your sales team has no idea about. So my key takeaway is, if you're planning to roll this kinds of services out in your MSP, start from the beginning with your whole team. Get everybody on the same page, understand the why, and then all the other pieces flow from there.
Yeah. For my takeaway, I was just thinking about, I've been thinking about this week, and 11 years ago, when the owners of the MSP that I worked at came to me and said, you know all the security stuff, right? Can you build us a managed security practice? I wish that I had some help. I made a lot of mistakes. I struggled through a lot of process and go backs because I didn't know what I was doing. And I didn't have resources for that. And so there's resources out there today. So I guess my takeaway would be get some help. I know we're not supposed to plug vendors, but I'm going to plug Empath anyway because I just finished recording a course for them. It's part of the Empath license. It's Risk 101. So learn how to think about risk, learn how to talk about risk, go over there, watch that. There's other people put we'd love to see in the Power Grid community, learning the giving you a crash course in how to actually build that practice, right? And shoot me a message on LinkedIn. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. So my takeaway is get some help. There's help out there for you. Don't do this alone. That's my takeaway.
Awesome. So, winding down a couple seconds here. Let me just do this for us. EMPATH.com. Let me see if I can get the right URL.
Yeah, so Empath launched this week, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, I'm going to do this.
We can plug some other vendors. Absolutely, they've been.
You just wait a second here, right? So I'm going to come over here.
Fantastic partners. Come on the Team Tim show. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
So for those of you that don't know, right, there, as it literally states on their website, transforming education and upskilling your MSP technicians, right? Wes Spencer, Kyle Christensen, Alex Farling, has this really great idea of leveling up and upskilling your staff. Right? It's not terribly expensive. It's a great way for you to not only educate your staff and yourself, by the way, but also have the accountability piece, also have that follow-up piece. There's a bunch of us in the community, Jesse, myself, Bob Miller, a bunch of us in the community that are starting to put content together for you as the MSP and your staff. Right. So they've just launched. It's really great. My recommendation, take a look at it, send your team over there, sign them up, get the learning that you need and bring in your whole team to be able to all get on that same page.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Tim, what do we have going on next week?
I have to look, but keep going. And I think it's really interesting, this Empath effort as well, right? It's, something that no one's really provided. It's something new. It's gonna. I'm sure they'll go through their bumps, but they're three incredibly smart guys that you've probably everyone. I think most of the people on the show know about them. So we're pretty excited about the launch this week. Next week, browser security. The Shield guys. No, actually, my bad. No, it's not Shield. It's Sention.
Sention.
Oh, nice.
Yep. Yeah. We have Zach and Henry coming on next week. Actually, I just met with them in person, right? So I've known Zach and Henry for quite a while. Just sat with them over at CompTIA SDCF last week. So yeah, they're
I dropped that in my themes for 24 browser security, and yeah. So there's another company as well, but I won't mention them. But Sention is moving from Windows configurations, Mac configurations, Linux configurations into the browser. So Chrome browser configurations. So I won't give too much away.
Yeah.
And so as we build out our schedule here, well, before I do that, Jesse, you have something you want to add?
No, I was just gonna say I was laughing because what is it? Browser is the new perimeter. Is that? Are we moving past identity now to browser?
Sure.
Identity. What perimeter? I thought it was identity. I can't keep up with it so much.
Oh man, that's been like a month. We need to move on to something new. New cycle. Let's go.
Okay. All right. So as we're winding down here in the last 30 seconds or so, while we have a great lineup coming up in the over this next several weeks and month or so, If you're a cybersecurity professional, or if you're maybe even a marketing professional, we have one of those coming up here soon, right? If you want to come and have a conversation with us to talk about how we can help educate, shift left, and bring value to the MSP community, head on over to teamtim.live, submit your bio, we'll get you on the schedule. We really love to have you here and really be able to bring that shift left conversation to everybody. Any parting words before I kill us and hand us all off and give you back a couple of minutes of your afternoon?
We're right on
These
schedule.
are great.
We're out.
Yeah, these guys are great. It's worth your time joining Team Tim. It's also worth your time checking out what they do individually. They're all quality. They're bringing great things to the MSP space, and they're good people. I
Awesome.
appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
sir.
much for that. And, as they say,
Subscribe now.